Today is the day we're gonna lift my truck. I'm super excited about this. Normally I don't tear down things this size or this, expensive, but this should be really fun. I have an Icon Stage 9 lift kit, and we're gonna remove a huge chunk of the factory suspension and replace it with these aftermarket components. Let's get started. So the reason people add lifts to their truck, or I guess my reason why I'm lifting my truck, is just to get a little bit more performance than the stock vehicle. So most vehicles are designed so they can be used on the freeway, because that's where it's going to spend 99% of its life. I like things that are practical and useful in a more broad spectrum. So having a lift on my truck allows me to go off-road and have more performance if I ever do need to go off of a paved road. So we have the truck lifted up off the ground a little bit so we can get those tires off and start working on the suspension. If you remember, when I first started my YouTube channel, I was doing more automotive and car repairs. And the reason my whole channel exists is because of this guy, Brian's Mobile One. We're in his shop today and he's gonna be helping me out a little bit.
All right, step one, get rid of the wheel.
So it's interesting that I've had this truck for about 6,000 miles and there's already some rust on some of the bolts inside. And rust is not a good thing when it comes to cars. It makes things seize up inside. So we're gonna wire brush that off really quick, and that'll give us easier access to remove some of the components. So we're replacing the suspension on the truck, and we're gonna show the majority of the passenger side right now. The passenger and the driver's side are pretty similar. I'll kind of explain a little bit what each component does as we're going through the lift. So that sway bar that we just disconnected, it wraps up and goes all the way through the front of the truck and attaches to the other tire.
Basically what that does is it connects the wheels and the frame and everything in such a way that you don't get body roll. This is what body roll looks like. If you go around the corner, it would lay to the side. That's fine for an off-road vehicle, but on the highway, you don't want to be doing this on the freeway on-ramp.
So the sway bar keeps the body of the truck from swaying side to side, keeps everything stable.
So this is a tapered bolt, and it goes through this in such a way that it really gets stuck. To get them undone, what I like to do is just put some shock through it. See, now they're not tight. We won't be pulling on them hard.
So obviously with a project like this, there are a lot of dangers. So the truck is supported in multiple locations, and we're taking special precautions not to damage the brake lines, because if the brake lines break during this process, it adds another level of complexity that we don't want to deal with right now. So to keep stress off of this brake line right here, this brake hose, we have a jack stand supported up underneath here on this knuckle, and that's keeping the weight from breaking that hose up there. My truck is brand new, only had it for 3 months, and there's already rust on some of the bolts inside. The last time I did this was on like a 95 Jeep Wrangler, and that was a nightmare. Some of the bolts had seized up so much that I had to just sawzall through them and remove the part, with the bolt still intact with the metal joined together.
Hooray, now I can turn it however I want.
If we were to just hit this with a hammer, it might damage the threads. And so we put the castle nut over the top like this, and then it gave us a flat surface to hit the hammer on without damaging the actual threads themselves. Little trick of the trade. And like always, it's a really good idea to keep your screws organized during the whole process. So up at the top of the shock, there are 3 bolts with a 14 millimeter nut attached to it. So we're gonna pop those out, and that allows the whole shock assembly to drop out from the housing that it's in.
So with the tie rod off, we can manipulate it to turn right or left with ease. So if you turn it like this, you can lift it up and out, and turn it back the other way, slide it out.
All right, so this is the shock we just took out. You can kind of see this housing inside that has a bunch of gas and oil inside of it. And that's kind of what makes a smooth ride when you're driving your car or your truck, whatever vehicle you have. It also has this huge spring on it. Now, Icon was nice enough to send me out one of their lift kits. This is a Stage 9 for my truck. And you can see that the inside reservoir, first of all, is super beefy, and it has an external reservoir as well. So when you're going off-road and there's, bumps and stuff in the road, and your shock is fully extended, it still has enough dampening oil and fluid inside of this to give you a smooth ride. Now, the vast majority of people will never ever need that because most cars spend 99% of their lives on paved roads. But since my truck is useful and has features, I want it to be able to go off-road, and that extra fluid and stuff in the shocks gives a smoother ride off-road when you're crawling or just, going on roads that aren't paved.
So that reserve reservoir is going to mount to this bracket. So with this out of the way, we can get this into place just like that.
All right, so this is the upper control arm. It's kind of like this U-shaped thing right here, and we're replacing that to give, you know, more travel to the shock. So that bolt we were working on inside with the upper control arm, that needs to come out through, like underneath the hood.
So we've got an air conditioning line that's in the way and a little wire harness. So we got to unmount this so that it can flex out of the way. With the bolt out of the way, now we can get a little bit of movement on it. You don't want to crease it, but you can certainly move it to clear the path for the bolt.
So this bolt right here, we're making progress. Wow, look at that thing. Perfect.
Yay.
Got it. So to make enough room for that bolt to come out, we had to bend on that little sidewall right there.
Just flex it on the body mounts.
A little bit of aggressive persuasion.
In order to get the reservoir bracket in there, you have to take out this plastic tab. If you push on it, you can see that it's not steel. It all looks like it's part of the stamping of the frame, but it's not. There we go. The irony is there's already tape right there, so we just complete it. So with those plastic clips gone, the reserve reservoir bracket's gonna fit nice and flush against the frame.
All right, so this one is for the passenger side, which is the side of the vehicle we are working on.
Get it up in the top as far as you can, and then just use a pry bar to get the rest of the way in. I would recommend leaving this undone and bolting the top first. It makes it a lot easier to get those 3 bolts in the top. Blue holds things in place through vibration without being too aggressive, and it also coats this. This is steel, and it has some kind of anodized coating on it, but anytime you put steel into aluminum, it's good to have something on it. So once you get the first one in, you can let it hang by that, and it'll help to line the other ones up. So I don't tighten it all the way until I've got all 3 bolts in place. If you get a bunch on one side, as you twist it in, it'll get around the other sides too. And the beauty of doing it this way is you can fit a pry bar underneath it here and get your up and down and forward and back pretty easy, but these are tough otherwise. Then go back through by hand and snug them up good. All right, so the bolt goes from the back side toward the front. If you support the shock, it goes in really easy. I like to have this side straight and then have this one angled up just a little bit. And you put the straight side on first where the bolt's gonna go.
Stick this massive bolt all the way under here. So the best way to get this in from underneath the hood was we had to put the washer and then this metal bit right here on top of the bolt first, and then that allowed the angle to get through this other hole and then feed through the entire control arm out the other side. We had to get a little creative with tapping the end of the bolt from underneath the hood after that washer and metal bit were on, and then it sank all the way through the rest of the control arm. All right, so the upper control arm is here. We're gonna attach this bottom part with this massive nut. So you remember the sway bar? Right below that is something called the tie rod. And this is what is attached to your steering wheel, and it moves the steering knuckle. It what makes your wheels go back and forth as you're driving your car. So we're gonna take that, pop it up back into this hole it came from, put the castle nut over top. So the reason they call it a castle nut is because it has these little pillars, you know, like a castle looks like. So we're gonna stick this pin all the way through this hole. Once that pin is in, it makes sure that the nut is not ever gonna spin, because when you're moving your steering wheel back and forth, everything is constantly moving, and that'll keep things secure. So this bracket right there, the sway arm needs to be offset a little bit from where it was before. So included with the Icon Stage 9 kit is one of these offset brackets. So we're gonna go ahead, plop this into place. Basically this uses the original bolt holes inside of the frame and then gives us new bolt holes to mount the sway bar to. And that reservoir bracket is between the spacer and the frame.
You'll notice we got the rubber splash guard between the bracket and this. That helps to reduce any potential for noise.
So in order to mount the reserve reservoir, we had to cut a few slits inside of the splash guard for the clamps, and then we can slide the reserve reservoir through the clamps and then tighten them down. This part right here is attached to the sway bar. It's called a sway bar link. We're gonna toss it through here. And then we're pretty much done once I get this tightened in. We have the reservoir, we have the top control arm, we have the shock in place. Not too bad. Take a look at that hardware. I think that looks sick. One thing about these lift kits is that they're adjustable, so I can go all the way down and have it basically be like the stock height, or I can raise it up along all of these threads and give me more clearance as the spring gets more and more compressed down the shaft. The higher we go lift-wise, like the more you compress that spring, the stiffer the ride is gonna be, but the more clearance you'll have from the ground, which depending on what you're doing, if you're doing a lot of freeway riding, you don't need a whole lot of clearance. But if you're off-road most of the time, you need to clear like boulders or hills or whatever, give yourself a higher point of gravity, higher center of gravity, then it's nice to have a higher truck. All right, everything is mounted and in place. All of the bolts are snug and tight. We have the skid plate stuck back on along with the sway bar underneath that. So we'll get the tire put back in and we'll be good to go. All right, so the front tires are done, but believe it or not, there are 4 tires on a truck. And so now we're doing the rear, which are actually leaf springs instead of like the coil shocks we saw earlier. So they should go a little quicker. There's less parts to replace. The leaf springs are actually super heavy. I'll show them to you over here. These things probably weigh over 100 pounds, and there's quite a few more springs than the ones we have underneath. So this is called an impact gun, and it's probably been my favorite tool of the entire day. All right, so these are drum brakes. The emergency brake line comes up through here, so we're gonna remove these lines. This is the emergency brake cable. We're gonna remove that, which will give us more room to mess around with like the axle and the shocks and the leaf springs and stuff like that. So this is the shock itself, which we're gonna be replacing. Perfect. Should come out. Perfect. Now let's get the better ones in. All right, so we're dropping the rear tire down. Got it. Just want to point out that we have the truck support on a lift and a secondary support underneath the axle. So I'm safe in more than one regard, along with eye protection. And right now we are taking off the bolts, these U-bolts right here that hold the axle to the leaf springs. Front bolts out of the leaf springs.
Yep. These aren't the hardest part, but they're the heaviest.
We have the 2 old leaf springs here. Working with leaf springs is kind of tricky because they're under pressure when they're all pinched together with this center bolt. And keeping them all lined up at the same time while they're pinched together under pressure is kind of tricky. All right, so I have a C-clamp on this, and we've released all of the bolts holding this sandwich together, this big metal sandwich. And as I slowly loosen up this C-clamp, it's gonna expand all the way out and allow us to switch out some of the leaves inside of the leaf spring. So with this big metal sandwich of a leaf spring, there's this one center guiding pin, and so that's what we were C-clamping together as we lined up all the layers. And there's little metal plates in between, which minimize the sound and the squeakage between the layers as they flex together.
So you got these little barrels that space out the middle part. So I'm just trying to get that to key up. You gotta be careful of your threads, but if you're lined up pretty good, you can just knock it through like that. In this case, according to the instructions, this goes to the rear with the 1, and then the 2 go to the front.
All right, we'll tighten everything down and then get it back on the truck. So as Brian is setting this back into the axle, there's this little pin at the bottom which sits inside of the axle, and what does that do?
It keys it up so that your axle stays a fixed distance. Now that we have a slack in the brake hoses, we can put the brackets back on. That's getting those tightened down.
So this little guy right here is called a bump stop, which is a little bit different than another video I made recently. It sits right on top of this, and that's so when the truck bottoms out, it doesn't hit the leaf springs, it hits this rubber on top of the bump stop.
Okay, so the U-bolts are what hold the axle to the leaf spring and essentially the rest of the truck. So there's a great big cup that goes on the bottom side. It's like a giant washer that helps to center it on the axle.
So the thing with these is that they all have to be even, like they have to be evenly spaced and have an even number of threads sticking out through the bottom. So right now I'm not going to go up all the way, I'm just going to snug them up till they're about even. Alright, so this shock right here, we're going to put it up through this hole in the top section, and then the bottom section goes into that little slot right there. We are almost done and my truck is almost put back together. Pretty heavy duty stuff. So even though this truck is the off-road TRD Tacoma, so it's built for off-roading, this shock right here, it's still, mainly gonna be driven on the freeway. So these shocks are quite a bit smaller than the Icon Stage 9 shocks that we're putting on. So you can see the off-road freeway shocks versus the off-road shocks. Pretty big difference.
For this next step, we have the bottom of the shock secured, and then for the top, it's hard because you got to squish these bushings. So to accomplish this part, you can either jack the axle up with it, or you can let the lift down. Once you crush it down a little bit on the bushing, then you can get your nut started. So you just stack it with the bushing like this, washer on top, and then you should have just enough thread now to where you can get this started. These nuts hold the top of the shock on. To do it right, you want to tighten it down to where when you put the second one on, it's flush. So put the first one on till you line it up like this, then spin on the second one and lock it down. If you look at it, it's got some texture on one side, just mechanic trick, put the texture down, bites better. Put this in the middle and ding it, and that'll help locate the drill bit so it doesn't creep. One of the things that I really like to use when I'm drilling stuff like this is bow lube. Boeing company came up with this for drilling. It comes out like margarine. When it gets hot, it gets more runny. When you get your bit hot, you just dip it again.
All right, so this is the bracket that holds the reservoir. So we're gonna stick that in place.
That'll work.
So the rear shocks and reservoir are in. Everything is tightened down. Remember, we have the bottom of the U-bolts. We have these bolts right here on top of the leaf springs, and these leaf springs have to be loaded, meaning that the weight has to be down on the axle and all the weight of the truck is on the leaf springs before you can tighten these bolts down in at the end because of the bushings. That's sweet. I'm super excited about this. The truck is back on the ground, and look at all that space for extra tires. I am super excited about that.
That's like real suspension.
That's awesome. You've done the suspensions on trucks and stuff before,
yeah.
So what would you change? What did you like about this one, and what would you change if you had to change anything?
I really like the reservoirs on this one. As far as changing things, I'd do something with the mounting of the reservoirs in the rear. I'd weld bolts on. It's way easier and it keeps it up off the frame. I like it where the lift comes from the steering knuckle having a little bit of change, but they're a lot harder and more expensive to make.
So with this, with the Icon Stage 9, we started at about 10 o'clock in the morning. It's 9 o'clock now, so it took us, I would say, about 10 hours or so. If we had to do it again, we could probably do it a little bit quicker, but you know, it's not too bad.
There's some learning curve. We cheated. We looked at the instructions a few times.
Yeah. So right now with the truck, it does have the stock tires on it still, which are pretty hidden inside of the truck and leave plenty of space around the outside, so inside of the wheel well. So I will be getting new tires and rims, but I will save that for a new video. This is just how to install the lift on the truck. And huge thanks to Brian for helping me out with this process. I don't have all the tools to do it myself. You can do it with hand tools, but with the right tools, it's a lot easier. If you have not seen Brian's channel, definitely go check it out. I'll leave a link right here somewhere on Brian for his channel.
Check me out. I've got all kinds of stuff that show how cars work, how to diagnose things. I got some hard-hitting, heavy-duty stuff, and I got some easy stuff too.
Huge thanks to Icon for hooking us up with this Stage 9 lift. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments, and Brian will be here to answer them all. Thanks a ton for watching, and I will see you around.